In our daily lives, we often make decisions. These decisions, however small they might be, has an effect in our lives. But when a turning point is made, the choice is between life or death, what will you choose? If a man chooses to think that it's nice to have a smoke right now, rather than doing something to save a fellow who is in need, dying in front of his eyes, could he live with this kind of decision? Lighthouse, a movie with a roller coaster of emotions, with references to Greek mythology, sailor superstition, H.P. Lovecraft, pointing to the Flannan Isle Lighthouse mystery. A decent movie in my books. I won't go frame by frame dissecting what is the meaning of each reference, but talk about the main emotions that struck me as I watched this movie. I assume that most of you have watched this movie. I'll skip the summary and get on to the ideas. The power struggle. Parts of the movie are focusing on the struggle that Mr. Howard is starting out. Like any other job, you got to earn your keep before getting up on the top. Thus, the comments of Mr. Wake that Howard's brasswork is not good enough for him to see the top of the lighthouse. I take sympathy for Mr. Howard, painting him as a decent hardworking man on the first half of the movie, and on the other side, his supervisor, Mr. Wake, a callous person that doesn't give shit about his subordinate. He is acting like an authority figure for Mr. Howard. Sure, he is a hardworking man, but throughout the movie, his lack of experience is showing. Making a bunch of mistakes along the way, like hauling the whole keg of kerosene up the tower rather than taking the little canister, moving erratically while painting the lighthouse then falling, or throwing their pile of shit up in the air downwind to him. Seems like all of these dumb choices can be solved by asking Mr. Wake for a hand, like in this scene where he asks help in boarding up the house for the upcoming storm. Shows a lighter side of Mr. Wake, that he will help if he is asked to. But this is all a facade. Mr. Wake never reveals intimate details about his life. On the other hand, Mr. Howard reveals all, spills his beans to Mr. Wake, but he didn't reciprocate his feelings. The shift of power dynamics happened near the end of the movie, when Mr. Howard beat Mr. Wake into a pulp and turned him into his lapdog. It felt good when I saw that scene. It feels like this a-hole gets what he deserves for treating his subordinate as trash. But on the other hand, I can't shake off the feeling that if Mr. Wake is being truthful, and Mr. Howard is actually going mad, because he doesn't have the sauce to face his past decisions. Which leads me to the next topic, Mr. Howard's guilt. This movie heavily reminds me of the book that is titled Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, where the main character, Raskolnikov, murders a pawnbroker, rationalizing that the world will not miss this evil person, but in the process, he also killed a witness, the pawnbroker's half-sister, which he sees as a pure soul trapped into servitude to her sister. It is interesting to see that Raskolnikov essentially told everything to everyone, albeit vaguely, while trying to hide his tracks from the authorities. Though in the end, the burden of guilt drove him to confessing his crimes, leading him to be jailed for 8 years, because there is already another person who confessed to the crime. The parallels of the book to the movie, of how Mr. Howard handles his guilt daily, keeps rationalizing that Mr. Wake is the bad guy, and he never comes into terms with his guilt, even after confessing everything to Mr. Wake, saying that he trusted him. He still wants to find something else, something that provides him with solace, hence the top of the lighthouse. I'm speculating here a fair bit, but it seems to me that the drinks that Mr. Howard consumes all throughout the movie is a metaphor on how he deals with his guilt. On the first dinner scene, we can see him drinking tap water. Black like oil, heavily contaminated. Even though he is acting tough, he is also conscious about his previous actions. And no matter how much chlorine is added, it still haunts him. The water is still black with his guilt. Still wanted to reconcile with his guilt. How could he do that? The person is already dead, and slowly the water becomes undrinkable, while the lying had led him deeper into his guilt. On the later dinners, we can see him succumb into drinking alcohol. This is after the fact that he killed the seagull, and worsened because of the extended stay on the island. He tries to drown down his guilt with a bottle of gin, making it a daily part of his life. even taking it with him while hauling the coal or tending to the mechanics of the lighthouse. The last was consuming kerosene with honey. This was their last drink together with Mr. Wake. Sweet, but it's hard to swallow. The scene where they both enjoy this new drink inside the lighthouse. I thought that everything would go well after this one. But on the next day, Mr. Howard has still no guts to face his past actions. And after the fact that he read Mr. Wake's logs, still truly believes that he is a hard-working man, that he can never do nothing wrong. So the last drink, kerosene with honey, is a metaphor for Mr. Howard being oblivious of his actions, pretending that everything is okay, but deep inside, he knows his guilt is eating him alive. So that's the end of the metaphor analogy. Let's get back to the guilt topic. Now, one way to reconcile your guilt is by superstitions, mythology, or most popular of them all, religion. These three things are the cure-all to ease people's mind in times of war, calamity, and turmoil. An escape to the constant looming of death in harsh times in early years of man until today. The comments of Mr. Wake about not minding the seagulls because they are the reincarnations of dead sailors. Or asking Mr. Howard if he is a praying man. Prayer is often prescribed to people who is lost in the complexity of life and don't know what to do, that at the end God has always all the answers. In this movie, prayer and sailor superstition is working to ground the person into reality by throwing their past actions into superstitions or to God. But Mr. Howard gives no mind to this silly talk. This led him to rationalize all his guilt by what information was available to him at that time. The information was how Mr. Wake's former assistant died. Having heard about it, he unconsciously fulfilled the same actions that Mr. Wake's assistants did, from mermaids to merfolks to the lighthouse being the salvation, and becoming insane in the process. Which leads me to the next topic. Characters will die. There is a fair bit of foreshadowing of death, from mermaids, killing of the one-eyed seagull, to the constant tension of Mr. Howard towards Mr. Wake's authority, or in this scene, where Mr. Wake realizes that this guy could actually kill him if he wants to. It is not fair to say that Mr. Wake is not concerned about his life, revealing on his logbooks that he is in constant fear towards his companion, that he doesn't want to work with him again after all of this is done, citing things that Mr. Howard did, like assault, theft, working while drunk, and giving his final verdict severance without pay. Who will kill who first is like one of the games played in the movie, but damn, it seems to me that Mr. Howard is heavily portrayed as the one who will be the killer in this movie. Or is it though? Which leads me to the next topic. What is real? All men have a burden to carry. The lies, the absurdness shown in the progress throughout the movie, blurring the lines between experience, reality, and hallucinations. Is it real or not? Am I experiencing this through the lens of Mr. Howard or somebody else? Or is Mr. Wake just gaslighting Mr. Howard to snap and bite the bullet on what he has done in the past? The scene where Mr. Howard doesn't even know what day is it? Or instead of hauling coal with his wheelbarrow, there is only a bottle of gin in it. If we base on the revelations of logs that Mr. Howard was manic on the course of the extended stay, or even throughout the beginning of the stay, how could we prove that? We all see in our eyes that Mr. Wake was the one who is swinging the axe and broke the boat. But on the next dialogue, he said that it was Mr. Howard who was swinging the axe. Who is going mad? Are we going mad? Is the guilt of Mr. Howard being projected on us? Is Mr. Wake gaslighting Mr. Howard? These scenes are truly unsettling, along with the very last line that Mr. Wake spoke before he was truly dead. Who is Mr. Wake? Is he Davy Jones? Is Mr. Howard dead from the start? Or is he still stuck in the freezing Canada forest, dying from running away from his decisions? I honestly don't know. It's funny how instead of going straight into the lighthouse, where he has now the keys, he decided to first grab a smoke. Seems like every time he tries to make a tough decision, he tends to go to smoking as a relief, delaying first what is utmost important to him. Like that time when he had a choice to save his foreman, he neglected it and thought it might be a good time to smoke. The end scene where he saw the light and fell down, and his entrails were eaten by gulls. Some say that it's like the modern day interpretation of Prometheus, stealing the light from Zeus, and was sentenced to repeated death by being stoned and pecked by birds, eating his entrails. That's cool and all, but what if it's just the curse given to him by Mr. Wake because of not being found of ye lobster? And are the logs the only thing grounded in reality? But it was written by Mr. Wake. Can we trust enough Mr. Wake to write truthful logs? I really like this kind of dynamic where the audience is often challenged on what is real or not. It seems like I'm being taken into Mr. Howard's lens to get inside the mind of the main character on how he thinks and how he reacts to the scenarios being presented to him, captivating the audience. But on the end, we are still left hanging on what is the definite reality. So what is my takeaway on this one? To be never left alone with another stranger in your new job? Nah, I'm just kidding. We sometimes take our previous actions like it was nothing, but sometimes it results into guilt. Then we take it as is, that it will just pass by and just fade away through time. But sometimes it doesn't, and it's carved away in our memory. Having a new job to escape from it won't do anything. Lying to yourself will not mend it. Drinking yourself into insanity won't help. Having someone to share your guilt openly, like Mr. Howard telling Mr. Wake, "You're tolerable when you're drunk." Is being truthful the cure for guilt, or being with another person? Are we the same as Mr. Howard, just toiling every day, not realizing what day is it, even if we take a step back and reflect on what we did throughout our lives? We know what to do. We have plans. We know all the work. The question is, will we do it? Or get back into the toil of everyday life and say, "I feel like having another smoke."